Picture this. It's March 1942, MacDill Field, Florida. A sleek twin-engine bomber roars down the runway, lifts off, and within seconds, both engines fail. The aircraft cartwheels into Tampa Bay in a massive fireball. The next day, another crash, then another. For 30 consecutive days, one B-26 Marauder crashes every single day, killing crew after crew. Terrified pilots are walking into their commander's office, placing their wings on his desk, and refusing to fly. Senator Harry Truman's committee is demanding the entire program be shut down. The Martin B-26 has earned the most feared nickname in aviation history, the Widowmaker. But here's what nobody expected. This same aircraft would go on to have the lowest combat loss rate of any Allied bomber in World War II. The Marauder would deliver precision strikes that changed the course of battles from North Africa to D-Day. German Luftwaffe ace Adolf Galland would later write in his memoirs, "The American medium bombers, particularly the B-26, were the most difficult targets, fast, heavily armed, and flying in tight defensive boxes. Attacking them was nearly suicidal." This is the story of aviation's most dramatic transformation, from death trap to deadly weapon. A story written in blood, courage, and the harsh lessons of total war. September 1939. While Hitler's panzers rolled into Poland and the Luftwaffe demonstrated the terrifying effectiveness of air power, America's Army Air Corps faced an uncomfortable truth. They were years behind. For 2 decades, America had retreated into isolationism. While Germany built the Heinkel He at 111 and Junkers Ju 88, American aviation focused on luxurious airliners like the DC-3. The wake-up call came hard and fast. In March 1939, with war clouds gathering over Europe, the Army Air Corps issued an urgent competition. Design a high-speed medium bomber capable of defending itself, carrying a substantial bomb load, and, most critically, going into production immediately. The winner was revolutionary. 26-year-old engineer Peyton Magruder designed a radical aircraft for the Glenn Martin Company. Short, stubby wings for unprecedented speed, tricycle landing gear, an all-plexiglass nose, and twin Pratt & Whitney engines producing 2,000 horsepower each. Top speed, over 300 miles per hour, faster than many fighters of the day. But here's where the seeds of disaster were planted. The design was so rushed, so urgent, that it went straight from blueprint to production line. No prototype, no testing phase, no time to work out the bugs. Veteran B-26 pilot Bill Conlon remembered, "My first impression going out to the flight line was that I was getting into something that would be the most modern that I had envisioned of anything flying up to that point. I knew that I was in something different when I first climbed into that cockpit." What he didn't know yet was that he was climbing into what many would call a flying coffin. Then the Army made everything worse. Weeks after the contract was signed, they demanded modifications, extra armor plating, torpedo racks, a dorsal gun turret. The weight ballooned. Magruder's streamlined Speed Demon became dangerously overloaded. December 7, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Suddenly, America needed combat-ready bombers immediately, and the B-26 was rushed to frontline units. Young pilots, barely out of flight school, found themselves strapping into an aircraft that required the touch of a test pilot. The problems cascaded. Nose wheel struts collapsed. Hydraulic lines burst. Fuel systems clogged. The untested 4-blade propellers failed regularly. BS-26 pilot Robert Woody recalled, "One of the first ones I flew was the 11th airplane off the line. The second day I was there, one of them went off the end of the runway and exploded. Let's just say they had my attention. To understand why the B-26 was killing so many pilots, you need to understand one critical number, 125 miles per hour. That was the B-26's minimum landing speed, the slowest it could fly before it would stall and drop from the sky like a stone." Here's the problem. The trainers these young pilots had learned on, aircraft like the AT-6 Texan and AT-17 Bobcat, landed at 65 to 75 miles per hour. The B-25 Mitchell, another twin-engine medium bomber, landed at 95 miles per hour. The B-26 landed at 125 miles per hour, nearly twice as fast as their trainers, and 30% faster than comparable aircraft. In simple terms, the B-26's wings were too small for its weight. Those wings generated tremendous speed, but required tremendous speed to generate enough lift to stay airborne. Pilot Harold Thomas explained the consequences. When you came in for a landing, you didn't just bring it in with a nice controlled approach like in a trainer. You brought it in at a very steep angle at high speed, and at the very last minute, you would flare it out. If your timing was right, you'd grease it on. If not, you'd splatter it pretty hard. Do it too high, and you'd hit even harder. But here's what made it lethal for inexperienced pilots: muscle memory. After hundreds of hours and trainers landing at 70 miles per hour, pilots instinctively wanted to slow down on approach. It felt dangerously fast coming in at 125 miles per hour. Every instinct screamed to pull back the throttle, to slow down. But if you slowed below 120 miles per hour in a B-26, the aircraft would stall. And at low altitude, there was no time to recover. The plane would simply fall out of the sky. Aviation engineer Vincent Burnett, who later helped save the B-26's reputation, put it bluntly: the Marauder doesn't forgive. Other aircraft will wallow, will warn you with buffeting, will give you time to add power. The B-26 just quits flying instantly. The statistics bore this out. Analysis of the training accidents revealed that 80% of fatal crashes occurred during takeoff or landing, and most were due to stall spin accidents at low altitude. This wasn't a flaw in the aircraft, it was a design trade-off. Magruder had chosen speed over forgiveness, performance over safety margins. In combat, that high speed would save countless lives. But in training, with inexperienced pilots, it was a death sentence. The Army Air Force faced a brutal choice: abandon the fastest medium bomber in the world, or accept the casualties until pilots learned to master it. They chose the latter, and the body count continued to climb. Trainee pilots, accustomed to slower bombers, would come in too slow. The B-26 would stall, snap into a spin, and auger straight into the ground. There was no recovery time, no second chance. Pilot John Marshall witnessed the carnage. "I lost a bunch of friends. We had 7 of us graduate from cadet school at Luke Field. In 6 weeks, out of 7 men, only 2 were left alive. The other 5 were dead." By early 1942, the statistics were damning. 165 accidents, dozens of crews killed. More B-26s were being destroyed in training than in combat. Senator Truman's committee recommended immediate cessation of all production and flying operations, but across the Atlantic, German intelligence was taking note. A captured Luftwaffe intelligence report from spring 1942 stated, "The Martin B-26 appears to be experiencing significant difficulties in training. However, the design specifications suggest a formidable weapon system if operational challenges can be overcome. Speed and armament are concerning. The Germans were right to be concerned. The Army Air Force still believed in the B-26. They just needed the right man to save it." Enter General James "Jimmy" Doolittle, fresh from his legendary raid on Tokyo, America's most celebrated pilot, and a man who'd never met an aircraft he couldn't master. Doolittle arrived at MacDill Field and immediately grasped the problem. It wasn't the aircraft that was defective, it was the training. He organized a complete overhaul of pilot instruction and maintenance procedures. Then Doolittle did something audacious. He organized a public demonstration at MacDill Field, inviting every terrified trainee pilot to watch. Legendary test pilot Vincent "Squeak" Burnett would fly the B-26 to its absolute limits. Hundreds of young pilots gathered on the tarmac, many convinced they were watching a dead man. Burnett took off, then proceeded to perform maneuvers that seemed impossible: steep climbs, tight banking turns, and then, the moment that changed everything, he shut down one engine at altitude and brought the B-26 in for a perfect single-engine landing. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Then Doolittle himself climbed into the cockpit. He took off, flew aerobatics over the field, and landed the supposedly deadly aircraft as smoothly as a trainer. Pilot Harold Thomas remembered, "Doolittle wrung that airplane out over the top of the airport with all the young pilots watching. We said, 'Jesus, if he can do that, we can too.' We knew we had a guy who understood the airplane's limits and ours. The maintenance crews received intensive training. Mechanics learned every system, every potential failure point. Pre-flight checks became exhaustive. The casual approach to aviation maintenance ended. By November 1942, the 319th Bomb Group deployed to North Africa for Operation Torch. The WW2 Marauder was going to war. This would be the ultimate test. The early missions were catastrophic. Pilot Robert Schaffer recalled, "What happened in Africa was we had no strategy whatsoever. No bombing strategy, no coordination, no photographs or maps of the target, hand-drawn maps. Our first flight that went out with 5 planes, none of them came back. The Air Force tried low-level bombing runs, disastrous. B-26s came in at 50 feet, and German 88mm flak guns tore them apart. In 3 weeks, the 319th flew just 20 missions and lost 10 aircraft, a 50% loss rate. This classified device was an early analog computer that calculated the exact release point for bombs, accounting for altitude, airspeed, wind drift, and target movement. In skilled hands, it could put bombs in a 600-foot circle from 2 miles up. German General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein, commanding panzer forces in North Africa, noted in his war diary, "American medium bomber accuracy has improved dramatically. Railway junctions and supply depots are being systematically destroyed. The Martin bombers are particularly effective, fast enough to evade fighters, accurate enough to hit specific targets." The bombing run was a ballet of precision and terror. Pilot William Conlon described the procedure. You had an initial point, a specific geographic point on the ground. You turned toward the aiming point. The bombardier would get his Norden bomb sight organized. It was an early computer. He'd call out corrections, left, left, right, right, guiding the pilot. Then came the moment every crew dreaded, the final approach. You looked ahead, and it looked like thunderclouds, Conlon continued. It was black. It was dirty. You felt like you could see the Germans at their gun positions. All we could do was sit there because the airplane was being flown by that computer. Time stands still. It's probably 3 to 4 minutes, but it seemed like an eternity. Bombardier Charles Muse remembered, "You go to the eyepiece, watching the crosshairs moving. You stop them. That means you've corrected for ground speed. When they come together, the bombs are gone." The minute I said bombs away, we had our hands back on the controls. But getting to the target was only half the battle. German flak was a living nightmare. Pilot after pilot described the same terrifying experience. Walls of black smoke, red flashes, the smell of cordite, the sound of shrapnel punching through aluminum. "We could look ahead," one pilot recalled, "and there was this solid black band with red flashes all through it. The Germans had already picked up our altitude and direction. They were laying a barrage into our flight path. I don't know how we got through. You could almost walk on this stuff." A German flak battery commander, Hauptmann Wilhelm Becker, later wrote, "The American formations were extraordinarily disciplined. Even under the heaviest fire, they maintained formation and completed their bomb runs. We scored hits, but rarely could we break up their attacks. Their medium bombers, the twin-engine types, were particularly stubborn. The B-26 proved incredibly tough." Pilot Robert Woody remembered, "We had them come back with half the tail shot away, an engine shot out. The B-26 would absorb tremendous damage. There were occasions where parts of the crew were killed, yet the plane came back." On one mission, Woody photographed a fellow Marauder that had taken a direct flak hit. Both engines were running, but underneath there was a huge gash in the left wing, holes all along the side. This airplane flew 150 miles back with me on his wing. He couldn't make a normal landing. He belly landed with the gear up, skidded in. Nobody was injured, but the airplane was completely wrecked. By early 1943, the B-26's reputation was transforming. But the most controversial moment was still ahead. January 1943. Winston Churchill and Franklin Roosevelt met at the Casablanca Conference and agreed. Italy must be knocked out of the war. The path to Rome ran through one of the most formidable defensive positions in military history, the Gustav Line. And at its heart stood Monte Cassino. The 1,400-year-old Benedictine monastery dominated the landscape from its mountaintop perch. Founded by Saint Benedict himself in 529 A.D., it was a treasure house of irreplaceable art, ancient manuscripts, and sacred relics. It was also, the Allies believed, a German observation post and fortress. German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring would later write in his memoirs, "I gave explicit orders that Monte Cassino Abbey was not to be used for military purposes. However, I cannot deny that its position made it an ideal observation point, and troops were positioned in the immediate vicinity." Throughout January and February 1944, Allied ground assaults failed repeatedly. The Gustav Line held. The landing at Anzio, designed to outflank the position, had stalled into a bloody stalemate. Military historian Rick Atkinson would later note, Monte Cassino was absolutely pivotal, a formidably strong mountainous area right in the middle of the Gustav Line. One way or another, they were going to have to solve the problem. The decision was made. The monastery must be destroyed. It was one of the most controversial orders of the entire war. At the mission briefing on February 14, 1944, a Catholic chaplain stood before the assembled B-26 crews. Pilot accounts described the moment. The chaplain asked if any Catholics were present. There were some in every group. The next question was, "Do you want to go? If you don't want to, you don't have to." One pilot remembered, the Pope said, "Give them hell," so we did. The morning of February 15th dawned clear over Italy, the sky filled with aircraft, 229 heavy bombers, followed by wave after wave of medium bombers, B-17S, B-24S, B-25S, and finally the B-26 Marauders. German anti-aircraft gunner Obergefreiter Hans Schmidt recorded in his diary, "The sky went black with aircraft. We fired everything we had. Some bombers fell trailing smoke, but they kept coming. The discipline of their formations was remarkable and terrifying." Pilot William Conlon was in the formation. The sky was full of every kind of aircraft in the whole southern European theater. Everything was in the air. We were getting shot up pretty good, but the pilot doesn't see a lot. He goes up there on leadership, flies to the bomb run, and at that point, the Norden bomb site takes over. Bombardier accounts describe watching through the bomb site as their bombs fell away, then seeing the impacts below. I remember seeing the casino, the white building sitting up there. We made our bomb run, and as we dropped our bombs, I could see them exploding from one end to the other. Nothing but dust underneath. In less than 4 hours, 1,150 tons of bombs fell on Monte Cassino. The ancient monastery was reduced to rubble. The bombing was devastatingly accurate. Pilot Robert Schaffer recalled, "It was solid stone, 6 to 8 foot thick walls. We knocked it down to rubble. We went twice a day until we finally knocked it down and killed every German big enough to die." But then came the bitter irony. German paratroopers of the 1st Fallschirmjäger Division, who had actually avoided the monastery out of respect, now occupied the ruins. The rubble provided better defensive positions than the intact building ever had. General Lieutenant Fridolin von Zenger und Edelin, commanding German forces at Cassino, later wrote, "The bombing of the abbey was a tragic mistake by the Allies. Before, we respected it as a cultural monument. After, its ruins became our fortress. The Allies handed us a better defensive position. The British and American ground assault that followed was a bloodbath. Despite the accurate bombing, Allied forces couldn't break through. It would take 3 more months and 3 more massive battles before Monte Cassino finally fell in May 1944. Military historian Rick Atkinson observed, "The bombing itself worked reasonably well. The B-26s did a good job. The bombing was quite accurate. But the Allied operation to smash through the Gustav Line failed. The Germans simply occupied the ruins. Yet, for the B-26 Marauder, Monte Cassino was a turning point. The precision, the discipline under fire, the ability to deliver devastating firepower exactly where needed, the Widowmaker had become a master weapon." By June 1944, The Marauders were ready for their greatest challenge, D-Day. In the pre-dawn darkness of June 6, 1944, B-26 formations roared over the English Channel. Their mission: soften German defenses before the landings, attack troop concentrations, destroy communications, and cut off reinforcements. Pilot accounts describe flying over the massive invasion fleet below, thousands of ships stretching to the horizon. "You could have walked across the channel on the decks of those ships," one pilot remembered, "and we were heading to clear the way." The Marauders of the 9th Air Force flew mission after mission, sometimes 3 sorties per day. They struck coastal batteries, destroyed bridges, cratered roads, and turned German defensive positions into moonscapes. A German soldier, Gefreiter Heinrich Sevelow, defending Omaha Beach, later recalled, "The American bombers came in waves. Before the landing ships arrived, they had already turned our positions into craters. The noise was indescribable. The earth shook continuously." As Allied forces broke out from Normandy, the B-26s shifted to interdiction missions, destroying the road and rail networks that German reinforcements desperately needed. They were ideally suited for this work, fast enough to evade fighters, accurate enough to hit bridges and rail junctions, tough enough to absorb punishment and keep flying. August 1944 brought another challenge. The heavily fortified French port of Toulon, designated a fortress by Hitler himself. The port bristled with hundreds of shore batteries and anti-aircraft guns. If it was to be captured, those guns had to be neutralized. The Marauders flew 48 separate missions against Toulon, one of the most concentrated bombing campaigns of the war. Pilot testimony from the Toulon campaign reveals the Marauder at peak effectiveness. From 10,000 to 11,000 feet, we could put 90% of our bombs in a 600-foot circle. We could hit the target, defend ourselves, and get back. In just 48 missions, losing only 8 aircraft, the B-26 dropped one of the most concentrated barrages of the war. On August 23, 1944, Toulon fell. The precision bombing that military planners had dreamed of in 1939 had finally been achieved. German General Johannes Blaskowitz, commanding Army Group G in southern France, reported to Berlin, "Enemy medium bomber accuracy makes defensive positions untenable. The American Martin bombers strike with devastating precision. Troop movements by day have become suicidal." By late August, Paris was liberated. As Allied forces pushed toward Germany, the B-26s continued their relentless campaign, destroying bridges over the Rhine, obliterating rail yards, and systematically dismantling Germany's ability to move troops and supplies. But even in the final months of the war, flying the Marauder remained deadly work. Bombardier Charles Meuse experienced this firsthand on a mission over the Rhine in early 1945. We were about 20 miles from Strasbourg when we took a hit in the bomb bay. We realized immediately we weren't going to make it. It was chaotic. Both engines were failing. We had fire. There was no mystery about it. The co-pilot's parachute strap caught in his seat. Meuse reached between the seats, pulled the release, and freed him. He was the first one out. The top turret gunner was dead. The tail gunner and radio gunner made their escape past the landing gear. Meuse and the pilot debated staying with the aircraft. They could see the Rhine River, see safety. We finally said, no, we're taking the way out. And out we went. I remember the tremendous quiet as you're hanging on a parachute, swinging gently in the breeze, hoping everyone made it. Meuse was captured along with his crew and spent the final months of World War II as a prisoner of war. A German guard told him, "You American flyers are lucky. Your B-26, very strong airplane. Many times we shoot, but they keep flying. Not like our bombers." May 8, 1945, victory in Europe. The final statistics told a remarkable story. The B-26 Marauder had the lowest loss rate per mission of any Allied bomber in the European theater, less than 0.1%. Over 129,000 combat missions flown. More than 169,000 tons of bombs dropped with unprecedented accuracy. Pilot Harold Thomas reflected, considering its birth when it came out and how many people it had killed, it was a bad airplane. But as we learned to fly it and the mechanics learned to maintain it, it became a good airplane. Come home on one engine, holes all over and still flying. We kind of loved that airplane after seeing what it did for us. And if you want to explore more untold stories of the legendary aircraft that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe. Because every machine has a story, and every story has the power to change how we see the past and the future.